Hi, fellow tea lovers. Settle in, because we've got a story. I'm Nell.
And I'm Rose, and today we're bringing you the tea.
Across eras.
So this story, I decided to call Monarchy and True Love.
Ooh.
So we all have feelings about monarchy, modern or not. Those of us that go into the kind of freelance love of history, I guess, we all have royals that we have kind of our particular favorites. And some people are diehard, and some people hop like me. I remember making the case to my mom when I was like, I want to say 10, that Elizabeth I had no choice but to execute Mary Queen of Scots, because it was the first book that I had ever read that had ever even discussed that. And so clearly that was the correct answer. That was
right.
Elizabeth was my true love. She allowed Shakespeare to become.
Didn't Elizabeth intercept a letter that Mary had written saying, like, she was down to kill Elizabeth?
Right. That ended up being the purported reason. And it's kind of debated whether her secretary Cecil was plotting. I'm actually reading a really interesting book right now that talks about that in depth and kind of like the back and forth between the two of them.
They were divided over religion, basically, right?
Religion for one, but there's also just the historic back and forth of we own Scotland, no you don't. It's
got it.
They're also both these far-flung arms of the Tudor dynasty that it's a very short-lived dynasty. They're very, very proud family, and so it's very, very convoluted. So the book is When Women Ruled the World, Making Renaissance in Europe. It's Maureen Quilligan. I highly recommend it. It's a little bit of a dense ride because it's a lot of object history, but she really makes the case for the significance of several objects that I think don't get enough scholarship. That sort of Elizabeth and Mary, love, hate, whatever perspective you've heard about them. She makes a great case for a lot of scholarship skipping over the love and the regard that were between these two women that were technically inhabiting such a thin space as female rulers at that point. I mean, it's a point in history where you have four insanely powerful women creating, the Renaissance in Europe and creating this golden age.
I love that.
Yeah, it's so
when you say
it's a very interesting ride.
Objects, do you mean like objects or the theory of
objects themselves? So what she's talking about in this book that I really liked, I think the best example is the baptismal font that Elizabeth I sent Mary upon the birth of her son James. James VI of Scotland, James I of England. There's a great looking Stars series coming out about James I. But so Elizabeth sends her a baptismal font, and it's beautiful and it's filled with symbolism for days, like any piece of artwork in that time. It's also a ready source of cash. It's easily meltable. It has a specific set value. And Mary does end up melting that down in order to drum up troops to try and save herself from a variety of frightening situations. So even though that object is lost, the idea of it occupying several spaces, it's a great godmother's gift. The font that your child will be baptized in, it's a great royal gift. This is fancy, and we deserve fancy because we are the fancy people. But it's also, hi sister, I understand you've got some problems and you need some cash that nobody's going to grab on their first try. Here's a thing you can melt. I just think that's a very interesting...
Yeah, that is. I'm not going to complain about my 9 to 5. I mean, I am, but maybe not as much anymore. I don't have to mount up some troops and be like, protect me from the evils of Microsoft Teams.
There's no running away in the middle of the night on horseback while pregnant. So, it's the little things.
Right. Wow. Okay.
Anyway, so coming back around, so my particular love of Tudor dynasty was it happened when I got to see Paul Delaroche's painting of Lady Jane Grey's execution.
Ooh.
When I want to say I was 7. It was the kind of family where we vacationed in any museum we could get our hands on, and I credit my parents for that. My mom definitely doesn't understand my love of museums now. To the extent
you took me.
that she created that love, and then it took off into a space that she doesn't recognize anymore, but also appreciate. You know what I mean?
That's life. I like that.
Yeah. She used to sit me down at every gallery and say, "What's your favorite painting? Don't tell me yet. I'm going to pick mine." And then we had to guess each other's favorite painting, but it got us talking about it.
Nice.
And I remember seeing that painting is just so emotional. She's in the tower, which that's a little bit apocryphal. She's
Yeah.
Definitely beheaded. Same space as everyone. It's this picture of her being beheaded in her cell in the tower, and her ladies are weeping, and it's so powerful. And that painting, the emotion of it was kind of what got the love rolling. But what made me think about this week was actually the controversy with the Princess of Wales.
I feel bad, like I suppose everyone else does,
I think
for
everyone,
wild speculations.
Yep.
I never thought it would be that, and I hope all goes well.
And quick aside, now that more information is available, wherever you fall on the idea of modern monarchy, it has to be said the Princess of Wales is going through some absolute human hell, and
Yeah.
I can't imagine trying to navigate a serious diagnosis as a public personality.
No,
Sending genuine thoughts of love.
absolutely.
But so when everyone's sort of, I think, having fun with the wild speculation, as little fun as it probably is for her, the speculation is sort of part of why you love the story, because they're public and why they make decisions and what the effects are. That's what makes up our history.
Right. Also, it's not like this is a royal family that changes very often. So, we've had Diana, Camilla, Kate, Meghan, and the Queen obviously was in power our entire lifetimes, probably also our parents' entire lifetimes. I'm not totally sure. But so just the difference now, I mean,
And
yeah.
I think it's interesting too because she was a kid. Elizabeth was during the Wallace Warfield debacle. She watches her uncle completely abdicate because of this woman. I think that colored her interaction with every single other new female family member that ever existed, because she saw that at a really formative time, and it was a really jarring set of events.
100%, because she wasn't going to be the queen.
Right. Wallace Warfield is actually indirectly, and partially directly responsible for the current royal family sitting.
Exactly.
It's not discountable.
If I knew that I was such a huge public figure and that everyone was going to be looking at me, I would probably do the same. What was her thing? Like, never explain, never apologize?
Mhm.
I don't know, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I probably would give people incredibly limited, specific access to my life.
Because she's seen what the opposite does.
Exactly. But that's why Holly from The Girls Next Level said, I don't want to be famous. I just want to be rich and hot. And I'm like, same, sister, same. It does. Fame sounds terrible.
Well, so during the, I guess, funner part of this, I saw this meme in one of the Tudor enthusiast threads that I follow, and I love those guys. I do want to do a partial shout out just because it's Tudor love, it's history love, and it's fun because you go into it. This is people who adore the story. These is people who are maybe just encountering it,
Mhm.
and seeing their joy at discovering these moments and remembering discovering those things, I think brings it more alive for someone like me that has been, sucking up every scrap with a straw since I was 7.
Right. The story is important though, because I think the story is, even though it puts them on a different level, it's also what makes them relatable.
Mhm.
My first royal adjacent interest, besides, of course, I was a senior, and I remember in my first period class, we had the TV on, and it was Diana's funeral. And that was really rough, and that was when I decided I hated everyone who made William and Harry walk publicly. But it was Kate and William's wedding. I woke up at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and that was before streaming. So I had to what was it? YouTube? I don't know. I had to go and watch it, and I loved every single second of it. So when I finally got to go to England, I went right to the palace and stared at the balcony, and then I did the really amazing tour they had at that time of Kensington Palace, and that was where I learned a lot of the history in small story-sized bites of some of the other princesses.
Right, but the point is, because you had that love and interest and passion about the niche part of the story that spoke to you, you wanted to learn more about it.
Exactly.
And that's exactly how we get our history colloquially now. I mean, I'm such a fan of armchair historians. I am. I'm going to talk about Philippa Langley here in a second for good and ill. I'm not sure how I feel about that.
I don't know that name, so
Philippa Langley, she is the reason that, well, at least a large part of the reason that we know unequivocally that Richard III was buried under a parking lot. It was, and I know I've been saying Tudors, and Richard III, that's War of the Roses. But that's
I
the
didn't know that either.
That's the seedbed of the Tudors. So just quick redux version. The reason that Richard III and really the entire War of the Roses matters is that so Henry VII kind of had the weakest claim out of the entire mess of the end point of the War of the Roses.
Okay.
So at the point where Richard III enthusiasts sort of get involved more, it's at the end of Edward IV's reign. He's, I think, the third person that has done the switcheroo in the War of the Roses. We will do more in depth on this at some point. And so Edward IV, he's sort of the flower of medieval kingship. So medieval nobility has several tenets that you're supposed to adhere to without question. Of course, you're supposed to be a warrior. Of course, you're supposed to be a rich statesman. You must also be a poet. That is one of the most important things. So I'm sorry, all of you chivalry folks, if you haven't been writing your poetry, you're really missing the mark when you open that door for a lady, okay?
Wow. Yeah.
But I mean, so he embodies all of these things. It's sort of like what you think of as a medieval king. You're mostly thinking of Edward IV. And then he dies. And, of course, he had a beautiful lady love queen that did her queenly duty and gave him an heir and a spare and several ladies to marry off besides. When he dies, it's yet another regency for a child, which has never historically gone well for England.
Nope.
They're sitting better than they have.
Okay.
And then Richard III comes in as first regent, then decides to just keep it. Then the princes get locked in a tower. Then no one really ever sees them again. And so this is one of the biggest mysteries of medieval as well. It's really, I think of it more as a proto-Renaissance period because you're leaving the medieval and kind of getting into the real meat of the Renaissance at this point. And so, and my niece, she texted me because she was watching TikTok history. Also a fan. I know that's going to sound weird, but I
just discovered STEM and TikTok.
Wherever you're getting information for fun, I mean, as long as you understand, not just taking somebody's word for it. Don't even take my word for it.
Yeah, do your own research.
But history for fun needs to exist, and if this is the platform that it exists on, then abso-freaking-lutely.
Right. What'd she see on TikTok?
So she saw Philippa Langley, and so that's what I meant I was going to talk about. The original Philippa Langley thing was that she was a member of the Richard III Society, and they feel the love of their particular royal, which is Richard III.
Okay.
They believe that he's been grossly maligned. He couldn't possibly have been a murderer. Of course, he needed to be king for his own reasons. I mean, I think the argument plays a little thin to me, but I don't feel that.
Right, I thought murder was just like part of the package deal back then.
Well, honestly, I feel like their opinion is kind of prove it.
Okay.
Because I think she's a screenwriter, but also just volunteer historian, was so into the story of Richard III. Her scholarship, partnered with the University of Leicester, actually in 2012 found his body. It was they did genetic testing. They actually proved it. And I think this is actually a side lesson in Don't Meet Your Heroes, because apparently she was intensely sad that it turned out he actually did have scoliosis. He's the one, it's a famous Shakespearean quote, now is the winter of our discontent.
Yeah.
Guy with a hump, that's...
Oh.
he is Richard III, and so he was considered such a maligned character. That's clearly Elizabethan propaganda, which, you're probably not wrong, but...
Okay. Side note, the princes who are locked in a tower, for people who don't know, I thought forever a tower, the tall thing, you go up a lot of stairs, like Sleeping Beauty was in one. Mm-hmm. And then I visited London and we went to the Tower of London, and it is not a tower, it is a fortress. So,
which, it still counts as a tower. It's just really more of a large square thing than you would really... Because I think we all grew up with the round tower with the flag on the top in our mind. The Richard III Society, they had this very cool... I don't even know how to describe it. It was called the Richard III Experience, and it existed from 1993. Sounds like a Vegas event, doesn't it? In practicality, it was a little more like walking into your eccentric uncle's man cave and realizing that he's just really into Richard III. It was. They had some really cool artifacts. They also had several mannequins in various versions of repair that were terrifying. But they had the love of that particular story. They were so into it. It reminded me of walking into the Black Hole back in the day. In Los Alamos, there used to be the consignment shop called the Black Hole, where the guy just had everything that you could possibly imagine. There was like old computer parts and tents. But if you talked to him for too many minutes consecutively, he was a very nice guy, but he would sit you down and make you watch his nuclear disarmament video.
Oh. And if you don't know what Los Alamos is, watch Oppenheimer.
Actually,
Oppenheimer?
Oppenheimer.
Oppenheimer.
A lot of those filming locations were weirdly familiar. Anyway. But yeah, so he was obsessed with nuclear disarmament to the point where it was a little bit dicey to get into an in-depth conversation because you were just going to be there for a while. You just needed time.
Yeah.
And so these Richard III Society folks, that was the first impression I got. I was like, wow, you really like this story. Well, I don't know enough to converse with you intelligently on this. I'm just sort of, by the end, sort of like, ready for dinner.
A whole society about one dude.
Right. And
interesting.
But Philippa Langley, she was a member of that society. When we got to go see the Richard III experience, it was about a year before they found his body.
Oh.
And so right after, having that sort of like, oh, deer in the headlights, Richard III, didn't know moment. And then all of a sudden he's in international news. They have found him. But unfortunately, a little bit of the shtick that they had at the Richard III experience, that he couldn't possibly have been the type of warrior that he was with scoliosis, kind of got blown out of the water.
I mean, if you just stuff him in some armor, I guess.
But so the thing that my niece was asking me about, she said, so who are the princes in the tower I keep hearing about? And so I kind of, so I give her the Redux version, and I kind of start looking it up, and it turned out it was Philippa Langley trying to kind of catch lightning twice. She had everybody, because she's a name now, and she has a little bit of clout. She had all of these news organizations all whipped up, like, I have new evidence that proves the princes survived.
Well, their evidence about his lack of scoliosis didn't go very far, but okay.
Right. This is based in the passion, based in the love. And so people got very excited. This is one of the major mysteries of an Anglophile medievalist. That's one of the things that I remember reading the Goosebumps book about it. There is now a version of the Goosebumps TV show that has this story in it. It is very ingrained.
I read all the Goosebumps. Which one is this?
That was a Night in Terror Tower.
Oh, snap. Okay.
I had a really long argument with a kid once that about the two princes in the tower. We're sitting here as 7-year-olds. Well, the princes disappeared before anybody ever knew what happened to them. That's just the Goosebumps book, you liar.
Wow.
Yeah, so unfortunately it turned out to be a little bit of a fizzle with the new evidence. It was some sort of rehashing of the Perkin Warbeck story, which he came in early on in Henry VII's reign and sort of claimed, like, I am the son of Edward IV, and it was a little bit of an Anastasia situation. I still sort of believe it was a little bit of an Anastasia situation and it was not him, but point being, there was no definitive new evidence. She just really liked being in the spotlight, I think, and I can't blame you. I mean, it's still good scholarship, it's still new evidence, but it's not a head in a parking lot.
Nope.
It's just never gonna be. You're never gonna catch that kind of moment in time once, and you're very lucky to have done so in the first. I mean, congratulations to you.
That's awesome
for the work that took. But it's not gonna happen.
Gotcha. Yeah.
What I thought was so interesting too, and for the uninitiated, Henry VII is the first Tudor king. He's the father of Henry VIII. I remember telling a friend once, a new friend, that I loved Tudor history. That was my candy land. And he kind of looked down his nose at me and said, oh yeah? Well, who's the first Tudor king? I looked, Henry VII, why? Well, who's the first Hanoverian king? That's not my time period. I believe it's a George. But people have opinions about those things. No, exactly. There's just so much gatekeeping to these things.
It's just weird. It's just history.
It should belong to everyone because it does belong to everyone.
I had a history teacher in college who always used to say, I wish I'd been a math teacher. Nobody can argue with me over math. Like, math is what it is, but history is just subject to whoever's telling it.
Absolutely subjective, but that's why it's beautiful.
Right? I enjoy it. Now, I didn't enjoy it in high school.
No, well, and it's a matter of presentation. I remember being offered Heart of Darkness, as, oh, this is the shorter of the two books that you could choose for this project. Dumb high school kid, like, yes, absolutely. I will take 70 pages into Heart of Darkness. I'm hating Joseph Conrad more than I've hated anyone in my entire life.
That sounds terrible, yeah.
Armageddon Now was an improvement.
I don't know what high school is like in Los Alamos, but in Slap Out, high school teachers, a lot of them were coaches, and I'm pretty sure the history teacher was Coach Broom. Shout out Coach Broom. All 4 years, and he would be like, answer these questions. And he would keep the room ice cold because he said he heard that would keep us awake.
No, it's just miserable.
Yep.
That does nothing. If you're that tired, you'll sleep in the cold.
Yep.
I had a music theory class once that was over full, so if you didn't get there on time, you didn't get a chair. And at that point, you might as well sleep because you couldn't hear or see anything, and the room was cold. So I slept in the back corner of that room more times than I'd like to.
That sounds terrible.
Right. So Henry VII, he's the first Tudor king. He wins it all by winning the Battle of Bosworth and killing Richard III. So, it's a natural enmity, obviously. What was so interesting that I just realized recently, and I'm very behind the game because this all happened and closed years ago, but so several years after we got to see the Richard III experience, they opened a Henry VII experience across town. So the Richard III experience, I always thought it was a coup that they had gotten this space. So York has the most complete medieval walls, I believe, in the world.
Oh, cool.
It's one of their major attractions. Very worth walking, absolutely doable. And so at the gate points, they have what are called the bars. Monk Bar is where the Richard III experience was. So it was actually housed within what ironically actually looks and feels more like a tower to me than Tower.
Okay.
But you can imagine, it's set into the wall. It's this square space. And so I always thought it was so interesting that they had gotten that extremely coveted space for their Richard III experience. I mean, it's a perfectly appropriate place.
Yeah.
It was a volunteer organization. It was very interesting that they had gotten the city to work with them that much. So then, across town at the Micklegate Bar, Henry VII gets his own Henry VII experience. And I love to imagine all of the armchair academics in town kind of meeting in the middle of the city with throwing pint glasses at each other. It seemed like the setup for the best soap opera ever.
Right. But
what's cool and interesting about the Micklegate Bar, too, it was a little bit of an extra screw you. Because the Micklegate Bar is where they hung the heads of Richard of York and Henry Percy, direct relatives of Richard III.
Oh.
So they took that space where his relatives were, just tarred, feathered, stuck head on spike with a paper crown, like, this guy thought he could be king. And his rival gets his own museum in that space. I like to imagine pitched battles between armchair academics throwing pints over whose gatehouse is the nicest.
Well, I say Richard's is.
Well, I say it was Henry VII. So there's not a lot of Tudor in this story, but it's the seed bed of what creates really an intensely unique microcosm of very dramatic, cool stories that we clearly resonate with. We've got show after show after show after show after movie after book after tribute everything. There's a tribute musical to the Six Wives of Henry VIII that I have yet to see, but I have heard lovely things about. But it's so relevant, and these are the seeds of where it starts because of everybody's separate, passionate love for this one particular corner of the story. When everybody has a moment, or even a section of people have a moment to stick their corners together, it creates a story that we cannot stay away from.
I love that. These people are wild. Really, I'm thinking about, of course, in the United States, this year is the election. Look, it's rough here, okay? Is it really any different, or is it just on a different playing field? Instead of anyone riding his noble steed off to battle and slicing off his opponent's head, now they just throw online insults at each other. And one of them capitalizes on all the weird, funny things people say about him, and the other one stresses me out to no end.
It's interesting that we assume as a democracy that we have given up on the fight about divine right versus non.
Right.
But I think we replaced divine right with monetary right.
Yes.
It is the new argument that's being made, and it's got about as much traction as divine right. Rather than God saying that you are of the blood that should rule the people because I said so, God has said that you are of the bank account that should run the people because I said so. It is the same argument.
It is the same. And if you uncover it all, back then it was really just, I killed you, and now I'm going to take over. And
well, I will take a little exception with it because it's not just.
Okay, that's true. That's true.
Without Margaret Beaufort's claim, Henry VII whacking off Richard III's head means very little.
That's true. Nowadays, it's like, who can interfere with elections enough, monetarily, once again, to create the outcome they want?
Mm-hmm.
I do like it when that doesn't work. I like it when one side has thrown an absolute fortune into trying to promote someone and they just completely lose.
But you can melt down the baptismal, you can pay the troops, all right, but you still might lose the battle.
Truth!
All right, guys, this is where we're going to take a short break. Please join us next time for episode 2 of Monarchy and True Love.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.